Hi everyone, and a massive welcome to another very exciting and insightful episode on Hero InfoSec Live of the CISO Experience, where we get to chat with security leaders about their experiences in the industry with a live Ask Me Anything with you, our awesome audience. But before we begin, for those who haven't tuned in before, my name's Simon Lindstead. I'm the founder of the InfoSec Live community and also your host for this show. And by sharing stories and best practice over the last few months, it's led to 40,000 views and 7,000 hours of our content being watched on YouTube by you, our amazing subscribers. So a huge thank you for your engagement. And if you'd like to support the wider InfoSec Live community, our scholarship scheme, or indeed buy me a cheeky decaf coffee, we do have a few ways that you can show your appreciation. First up, the ability to purchase super stickers in the chat, if I can find where to put my mug down without spilling it. If you'd like your question bumped up to the top, and 3 tiers of membership, allowing you to show your support in any way that you can. And now if you want swag, we've got you covered with a brand new YouTube store at the top of the page. Link is there if you want to have a look. But whether you join or not, being here and engaging with our content is what really matters. So if you're watching this live, please do like and subscribe. We want to make these as interactive as possible, and make sure you do drop any questions in the chat, as after all, it's you, our audience, who's made these series of events so special. And if you're a security leader and you'd like to be featured in this series, please do reach out to me through the InfoSec Live community. Without further ado, today I'm very honored to be joined by Dr. Nikki Robinson. Nikki is a security architect and professor of practice. She holds 2 doctorates in Cybersecurity and Human Factors, and her experience ranges from vulnerability management, incident response, all the way to digital forensics. She's also a mom of 2. I nearly said 3 then. No idea why. I don't think you've got an extra one hiding, Nikki. And loves running and triathlons. And she's just published an amazing book called Mind the Tech Gap, addressing the conflicts between IT and security teams. Super looking forward to this. I'll stop rambling. Let's bring her on. Hey, welcome.
Hey, Simon, how's it going?
Really well. Thanks very much for taking the time to come on and have a chat today. We've got lots and lots of people in the audience, very keen and ready with questions, I think. So it's going to be an exciting one.
Awesome. Thanks for having me.
No, it's my pleasure. I've gave a bit of background about you when we just started then. Would you mind us kicking off talking about how you got into the industry in the first place and a bit about your journey?
Yeah, it's funny because it sort of came full circle back to human factors. I actually, when I was going for my undergrad, was studying psychology. And I had a mentor at the time. I was trying to decide if I was going to stay with psychology or go with IT because I loved IT and the idea of it. And he was like, "What are you crazy? Go into IT. That's the place to be." And so I got my degree in IT. I started on help desk. Worked my all the way up to senior sysadmin and remote lead, remote access lead. And so I was sort of digging the IT side, and I got really interested in vulnerability management. That was what sort of drove me to get into cybersecurity. So I started getting into security engineering, and now I'm a security architect.
So let's take a step back. So why the love of vulnerability management? What was it that excited you about that?
Yeah, so I think the complexity around it, I think that sort of scares a lot of people away, but I was really interested in vulnerability scoring, because what I found is so many people, and myself included, I was focused on these criticals and highs, as scored by a CVSS. And then
Yeah.
I started asking those questions. Well, why are they scored as medium? Why are they scored as low? Are they exploitable? Are they not? Should I be worried about them? And once I started digging into that, it just snowballed from there. But that was really where my love of vulnerability management came from.
So, not being a technical expert like yourself, the sort of outside opinion I seem to have formed on CVSS scores is that they can be a little bit unreliable and perhaps not too relatable to the business sometimes. Would you have any comments around that?
Yeah, I think CVSS is a great place to start. It's a great place to, because without that, we're just sort of left with vulnerabilities, and, we don't really have much to go on. So I would say it's a good place to start. But I think if you're trying to add context, if you're trying to understand what they mean to your organization or to your systems and platforms, you sort of need to supplement that with really understanding what the vulnerabilities mean to your organization. And so I think good place to start, but add context, understand what that means, internet facing systems versus maybe standalone or
Yeah.
siloed systems, so I think adding that additional understanding and context, that's really where you have to go.
And with our with our overwhelming desire to automate everything we look at or touch, is that something that can and has been automated, or does that still involve a lot of human interaction?
So yes and no, which is my favorite answer. I would say yes, there's definitely some automation that you can put into place, and there's a lot of great tools out there that can certainly help to augment. I think like Tenable has VPR, it's the
Yeah.
vulnerability priority rating. So there are definitely tools out there that you can use to help you understand and get good context. There's also the EPS, the exploitability predictability scoring system now that
Yeah.
helps you understand, is this going to be exploitable? Is it not? Should I be as concerned? So you just sort of have to layer that approach onto what you're looking at with just the CVSS scores.
That makes absolute sense. Or as Jed says, killer suggestion. Many don't actually have a clue what they need to look for. Does that take us back to understanding the business and understanding where the risks are posed to the business, perhaps?
For sure, because a vulnerability without context can seem, I think, they can seem really scary. Highly exploitable, critical vulnerability. It's red. It looks bad, and maybe it is, but it may not also be as important. Maybe there's something else that's more important that maybe looks like a medium. And that's why I really started an academic journey too, because when I looked into vulnerability chaining, I found that vulnerabilities may be scored as a low and medium, but when you use them in combination, they're a critical attack.
Yeah,
So it's all about that understanding and what does this mean to me?
absolutely. And we'll come back to this at some point during the show for sure. But the human factor, the psychological element of security isn't one the vendors talk about much. I can say this because I don't work for a vendor, by the way. It's it's something I think from, I suppose, a layman's perspective of the industry, there's an awful lot of focus on technology and solutions, but there's a big gap around the psychological factor of security. And I want to ask you a question around how important has your knowledge or your previous study in that area been in this industry?
Really critical, and I would say in a lot of different ways. And that was where I say I sort of circled back to human factors and understanding what psychology means to technology. So I would say from a couple different angles. One would be the communication. How do I communicate this risk to anyone, whether it's a fellow IT practitioner to an executive? How do I translate a CVSS score into business risk? And a lot of that is communication. I would also say from a understanding how difficult it can be to do something like vulnerability management. It's highly complex.
Yeah.
We get, alert fatigue and vulnerability fatigue and all these things that, without understanding what that means, we could be missing that context. We could be missing vulnerabilities that are highly exploitable because we're exhausted. We're looking at
Yeah.
10,000 vulnerabilities, and it's a lot for any person to digest and action on. So I would say mental workloads, understanding cognitive bias, things like that has been such a big factor in security for sure.
No, absolutely. And there's a quick question here from Carlos. Let me just bring that up. If I move you to the top, then I'll get cut off and you won't. Here we go. What's the right mix of technology and human? This is a tough one to build a solid vuln management program. Good question, Carlos.
I think it is a delicate balance, right? Because if you don't have the technology there, right, starting with just an asset inventory, if your asset inventory isn't right, it's going to be really difficult to have a comprehensive and mature vulnerability management program. But I would say if you can get to that place where your technology is solid, the configuration is there, you sort of have a good understanding, that's when you need to say, okay, how are people using these systems? Are we using them properly? How are people configuring these scans or these reports? Are we just submitting default reports that have 300 pages of vulnerabilities with no context? Or are we tailoring them to help the human on the other end of that report understand?
Yeah.
Are we providing them maybe top 10 vulnerabilities versus top 100?
Yeah.
So I think understanding how we're providing that information back is a really important part of the vulnerability management program.
I think as Art O'Kane, I don't know if you know Art, he's a CISO. He said the humans needed for context.
Yeah.
And I think that's a great point. And going back to something else you just said, if you don't know what you've got, how can you protect it? I think is the first step that many companies buy bells and whistles to plug in first before actually understanding what it is they need to protect. And going back one more to your comment about terminology and the ability to communicate with business leaders, coming from a financial services background, there's an awful lot of terminology that sounds the same, but it isn't. And I think a
Yeah.
lot of that gets lost because when I first came in, I thought, oh, I know all about GRC and I know all about this and I know about that kind of risk, but it isn't the same. And how do we address that challenge?
Yeah, so I wrote a paper on this last year maybe or maybe the year before on the type of language we use in vulnerability management because you're absolutely right. We tend to use the same terms, but people don't understand them the same way. They have a different context. And part of that is perception. Part of that may be their experience, how they've used that term in the past, and not necessarily based on maybe an industry standard or something like that. Vulnerability management is a great example of that. If you say vulnerability management to someone, a lot of the times they'll say, "Oh, patch management." It's like,
Yeah,
no, 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 no. It's a lot bigger than that. It means a lot more than that. Patch management's a component of it,
yeah,
and really important, but that's not the full picture. And so I think from a terminology perspective, it's not just saying, well, vulnerability management, but providing a little bit of context, like we're talking about with what you're saying. I mean, secure configuration, patch management. What's my IAM strategy? What does that mean
yeah.
to the vulnerability management program?
Which means that. Yeah,
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah. Yeah, I think it was the first thing I was ever taught in sales was the three words, which means that, making sure
Okay.
you frame it for the person that you're speaking to.
Mhm.
I've got some questions down here. I'll just get my iPad up because I've tried to be smart and get an Apple Pencil and write them down, but I still find myself gravitating back to a normal pen and paper. So I've got a bit
Yeah.
of a mixture of both. You do a lot of research for the cybersecurity industry. Obviously, there's areas where people see the obvious value in that, but sometimes people fail to see the importance of that research. Can we just touch on that for a little while?
Yeah, absolutely. It's one of those areas that, especially when I was on the IT ops side and sort of making the transition into security, I started looking at a lot more academic research, understanding what researchers out there are doing, and finding that there's definitely some, right? Lots of universities that are
Yeah,
focusing on security research, but there isn't a ton out there that's published, especially for nuanced or niche areas, like vulnerability chaining. I think I found maybe 10 researchers out there, and a lot of them worked together
in the same
on
team.
different
Yeah,
papers. Yeah, and so it was the same sort of 10 people. But what I was finding is that a lot of them are saying the same thing, right? That, we need either additional metrics for CVSS or we're not accounting for vulnerability chaining. But what I found is that really what they were saying is, yes, we've identified this as a problem, but no one's come up with a solution yet. And
no,
so that's where I think the research we can really benefit from additional research and and working together with academics is helping to build those solutions. Okay, you've identified the problem. How are we going to solve this? And that's really what motivated me to continue working on research while still being a practitioner.
No, it makes sense. I mean, again, from my layperson's view, when I came in, I was doing some consultancy work for a firm who'd built a platform that was all about vulnerability prioritization. Ranked Right, they've actually sold out. They got acquired a few months ago. But the thing that I couldn't understand, again, it might be because I'm not very technical, is why can't you make it easier for different industries to start looking at different risks that relate to them and the faces of their business, to start making it or having a framework in place where if you've got a manufacturing business, these are the things you need to look for. If you've got a financial services business, does that not make sense? Is that me just being far too simplistic? Because I do that a lot.
No, no, I don't think so at all. I honestly, I think this is where we can really leverage, and I'm sorry to use a buzzword, machine learning.
Yeah,
Um, Mostly because it's adaptable. You can build different models and train them for different things. So if you're able to build a product and then use machine learning to adapt for different types of sectors or different types of situations, I think that's where decision trees are really important. Things like that can sort of help add that context based on different industry or different requirements,
yeah,
because so many different industries have different requirements too. Different frameworks they need to follow.
absolutely. Yeah.
So yeah, no, I don't think that's too simplistic at all. Yeah.
It's the first thing I've got right all year. I'll just bring up this comment at the bottom. JJ, great to see you. I'll just sort of do this and then I can look over. Most security programs don't understand the business value regarding the generation of value on the subject of vulnerability management. Vuln consolidation is also a good method, targeting the most present in the environment by volume. Any comments on that?
Yeah, that is definitely a tactic I've used before, which is trying to how many systems do we have affected by this one critical vulnerability? Because if it is a patch, or let's say it's a registry key that I need to apply with a group policy or to a number of systems, I
Yeah.
can usually do that pretty quickly, and that's going to lower risk quite a bit. A lot of the challenge around vulnerability management is sort of how can I lower risk really quickly, and how much risk can I lower really quickly? And that's a great method to be able to do that.
Yeah. JJ normally talks sense. That's why I bring his comments up. Makes me
JJ's
sound more
great.
intelligent. Yeah, thanks,
Yeah.
JJ. JJ's actually co-hosting the first ever InfoSec Live virtual con on the 14th of April. We've got a little gather town venue that holds about 500 people with an interactive stage area. And we're going to try and do something a bit different, aren't we, JJ? Not vendor led, speaker led. And then once we've got the speakers, we'll then find the sponsors, trying to do it the right way round rather than getting the sponsors first and all the talks are formed around their products. Not that I'm having a dig at the industry at all by that comment.
No, that's great. That's fantastic.
Thank you. Right, let's dig into the most important thing. Talk to me about the book.
Yes. So I've said it a couple of times now, but this idea has been living in my brain for 5 or 6 years now. Even when I was on the IT side, right? And, let's say I'm working with an auditor, maybe I'm working with an assessor, and we're sitting in very long meetings. And a lot of times there ends up being contention. We're
Yep.
frustrated. It's hard to work together, because we have different goals and different missions. And it's not necessarily because they wanna make my life difficult. They wanna try to do
Not
their
not
job.
always.
Not always. Yeah. No, but typically they wanna do their job, and their
Yeah.
job is sometimes in conflict with what I'm trying to do. And so I started having this idea of, wow, there's really this sort of dichotomy between what we need to do, what we have to do, what our mission is, what our goals are, and, a lot of time that ends up in conflict. And that conflict then snowballs into risk. And that's sort of what I was trying to address with the book here, is that if you can start to address or at least identify where some of these conflicts may exist, you may actually be able to affect your risk management program, and in a really positive way.
Do you think back to JJ's comment about business understanding as well? Do you think it helps to have a more educated IT and security team in relation to what the actual business objectives are, or is that a bit of a harsh comment?
No, I think I think yes and no. Again, my favorite answer.
Yeah.
Um, yes, because yes, because it is great to be able to understand what the business goals are, right? Like if
Yeah.
if we have in the next 5 years, we need to focus on A, B, and C. that's going to help me understand where my priorities are going to be. It's going to help me understand what I need to focus on. Is doing this extraneous project going to help us get to A, B, and C? Maybe not. Maybe I need to push it to the side. So yes, I think at least understanding them at a high level is really beneficial, especially for project management, and for risk management too. Because if you're trying to determine, should I focus on these 10,000 vulnerabilities or these 10,000, understanding the business context and saying, hey, we need to get this application into production in the next 6 months. I need to focus on that. I need to make
Yeah.
sure that that's secure before I focus on something else. So yeah, absolutely.
Brilliant. And who is the book? Who's the target market? Who's the target audience for the book?
So
And more, actually, before that, have you got a link to where we can buy the book? If you drop it in the private chat, I'll put it in the chat on
oh
here.
yeah, I'll get it for you. Yeah.
Thank you.
So yes, I would say the book is really targeted at a few different people. Um, IT and security, absolutely, right? Different types of practitioners, developers as well. I would say it's a helpful resource for management, but I really wanted to focus on practitioners because when I was doing research, what I found is there are a lot of books out there for leadership that are talk about emotional intelligence, they talk about empathy, they talk about, some of those other psychological factors, but I had a hard time finding a resource for practitioners. And so I wanted to provide sort of a good understanding of, hey, this is sort of how we got to where we are, and that's okay, but now we sort of understand that, and here's what we can do to sort of work together better. Let me see.
I'd muted myself then. That sounds fantastic. What I'd like to do to encourage some audience participation, let me get this in here. I'm going to buy a copy of Dr. Robinson's book, and I'm going to give it away to the best question that comes in the next 20 minutes. So maybe if we ask nicely, I might even send it to you to get signed first. Nikki, what do you
Oh,
think?
that'd be great. Yeah, I'd be happy to. I'd be happy
Brilliant.
to.
So if anyone's got a question, please do drop it in. I know Carlos has knocked another one in there, so let's pull this. Asking you to bring your crystal ball out now, Nikki.
Oh.
Pull out the crystal ball. Where do you see vulnerability management in the years to come? What is on the bleeding edge of tech? Sounds like a British swear word, that, Carlos. Yeah.
Oh. Well, I mean, if I've learned anything about being in tech, you do have to have a crystal ball. It's just
Yeah.
part of the trade.
It's part of the toolkit. Yeah.
Yeah, it's part of the toolkit. So I would say I do think there's going to be more of a focus on vulnerability management in the next couple of years. I think that it hasn't been as big of a topic recently just because there's a lot of other things going on. We've got zero trust, we've got
Yeah.
software supply chain security, we've got all these other things that are going on, and people have sort of pushed vulnerability management to
But
the
they've
side.
moved on to the next buzzword, I think, is what's
Yeah.
happened, hasn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But vulnerability management is really a big component of all of those things. Software supply chain security, what are we talking about? We're talking about managing vulnerabilities across the software supply chain. Zero trust. How do you manage vulnerabilities that are not necessarily CVE IDs, but how someone can get into a system and conduct privilege escalation or do lateral movement? All those things are vulnerabilities. And so I think there's going to be a renewed focus on vulnerability management. I do hope that the renewed focus will help or will include more of the human factors, right? Which is, how do we actually bring context to this? How do we make this concise? Because I think that's one of the other problems with vulnerability management. It's a lot. It's a lot of information.
Yeah.
There's, I think, at least 50 CVE IDs that get released a day, and that was from like 2021. So I'm sure it's higher now. So I would say, hopefully a renewed focus on vulnerability management, and I would say probably an increased focus on exploitability. That seems to be a way to help hone in on which vulnerabilities you want to focus on the most. But if I'm thinking 5 years out, I'm actually going to probably challenge that a little bit. A lot of the vulnerabilities that we see that are classified as exploitable, um, we have to talk about likelihood, but there are a lot of vulnerabilities that aren't classified as exploitable, but they
Yeah.
may be exploitable, or they may become exploitable. And so it's about understanding the picture over time, that picture changes. And so I think vulnerability management is going to become more like an adaptive security model, if that makes sense.
It does make sense. And I think from my point of view, it's the confusion around what vulnerability management actually means, because you've got so many people using different terminologies for different things. And you mentioned it earlier about patch management.
Right.
And again, it leads nicely into the fact that no one's an expert in all of cybersecurity, I think, doesn't it?
Absolutely. We can't know it all. And I think that that's another piece of the human factor, right? Is we can't know everything. And so I think, relying on each other, talking to each other, understanding what other people's challenges are and maybe what they found worked and didn't work, I think is really helpful too because if someone's running a really successful vulnerability management program, I want to talk to them. I want to
Yeah.
see what works for them. What
Are we,
how
are
did
we
they do
talking
it?
about the need for empathetic listening there, Nikki?
I think maybe. Yeah, I think but I think sharing those stories is really important because without them, it's really difficult to, if we're just sitting on a lonely island saying, "I think this works," maybe it does, but it could be helpful to talk to other people too.
Yeah, I completely agree. Sorry, I'm trying to do two things at once. Is that a cat I can hear meowing in the
I
background?
have no, my puppy,
Your
she's
puppy?
literally chewing on my hand. Yeah.
Oh, what sort of puppy have you got?
So I have an Australian Shepherd. She literally one
Oh.
of the last podcasts I did, she knocked over my lightsabers. So if you hear lightsabers going off in the background, that's just her. It's
It's
fine.
fine. It's not random Jedis in
It's
the
fine. Yeah, yeah,
background.
yeah. It's
No.
totally fine.
Okay, we've got a couple more questions here. Hey, Mike Miller, by the way. Here we
Yeah. Hey,
go.
Mike.
Yeah, there we go. Dominic's is a good one. Let's go for this. Alana loves the puppies in the background. In a
Yeah.
world where people hide their head in the sand, brilliant. What is the best way to educate them that they are vulnerable? It's a very
Yeah,
good
so
question.
I think starting with something small, so showing someone a dashboard that's covered in red, it's really intimidating and it's scary and everything, but I think starting small, hey, these are our top three highly exploitable vulnerabilities. This is what we need to focus on. I think slowly, that's probably the best way to do it. I think sometimes, like we were talking about mental workloads, right? Cognitive
Yeah.
overload. I think if you show people too much at one time, they're sort of like, oh, I don't want to. That's a lot. I don't think I can deal with that. But if you give them piecemeal to start with, then you can start making that window a little bit bigger, and help give a bigger understanding to what vulnerability management means. But I think to help someone understand that they are vulnerable, the best thing you can do is either maybe have a pen test group come in and run, a pen test and show them, hey, we actually exploited your systems and here's how we did it.
Which
um,
means that.
yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Yeah. Or show them how those type. Now you can see her.
Hey.
Yeah, she's coming in. Yeah. Um, so so if you can show them the vulnerabilities, actually, maybe how they were exploited in a different organization,
Yeah.
or show them how a data breach occurred at some other organization and maybe the data they lost, the reputation that was affected, the monetary value that they were affected by, all those things
Well, this
can.
is relating it into terms that they understand. This is back to
Yeah.
storytelling, isn't it? This is back
Yeah.
to engaging your audience and understanding what drives them, what they're afraid of, what their concerns are. And while we're talking dogs, I never post pictures of my children on here, so I better put a finger over the top. But that is Dave. He's been
Oh,
put on some furry earmuffs by one of my 4-year-old twins today, but
oh,
he is
so cute.
an 11-year-old bull mastiff whose back legs have nearly gone. So we're giving him
Oh,
lots of love
yeah,
at the moment.
yeah.
It's a bit sad, but there we are.
I
Just thought I'd do the doggy sharing.
Yeah, you're
So
gonna see. Yeah, yeah, she's gonna be popping in and out. She's just hanging out.
I love that. Liam's asked a question. I'm not sure what this was relating to, Liam, because you asked it earlier. Question: you're low on memory. What's the best fix and quick and inexpensive? I mean, if you're talking about low on memory because of your age, like me, but I find water helps keeping hydrated. When it comes to, I suppose, an external memory drive, maybe I don't know the answer.
Maybe quick fix, inexpensive for vulnerability management.
Maybe yes,
Maybe.
maybe.
Um,
Let's go with that.
let's go with that. Okay, so I would say quick fix, inexpensive for vulnerability management. There are a ton of great open source tools out there that you can use to sort of get you going. And I would say, as far as just getting going, it's sort of like, hey, let's get our asset inventory, going, and then we'll just go from there.
And what
Let's start
about for
there.
people? We've got a few people who's talk about virtual memory. No idea, Liam. I
Oh,
virtually can't
sorry.
remember. Um, we've got a lot of people on here. We've got leaders, we've got CISOs, and we've got people who are trying to break in from different careers. What would be a good starting point for them to start to learn more about vulnerability management? Oh, I think I've lost you. Maybe your dog's knocked the wire out, Nikki. Let me just check on YouTube to see if it's me who's frozen or whether it's you. Bear with me. Hold on one sec, folks. No, it's definitely Nikki who's frozen. Talking about virtual memory there, Liam. I think we might have a memory issue, which could be the reason why Nikki's frozen. Let me send her a private message in the chat and let her know. Your camera has frozen. And if anyone would like to come up with a question for me while we're waiting for Nikki to come back, polite answers on a postcard, drop your questions in. I'll happily cover them off when I can. But do remember, I'm not technical. Here she is. Oh, there you are. Where did you
So
go?
sorry. My dog literally unplugged the computer. I'm not kidding. I wish I was. She literally I looked down and she had, like, pulled out the yeah, so
Oh, brilliant. I
is
was
this at least the
flapping
first time
around for a
that's
minute. Flapping around for a minute there. Please don't ask me any technical questions till she's back.
oh my gosh. Yeah, well, life with a puppy, I guess.
No, absolutely. Right, I have got some other questions. Let me just bring these ones up. We talked about why security research was so important. We briefly touched on the book, but I want to come back and dig into that in a little bit more detail. I want to talk about the cross section of the human factors when it comes
Mm.
to security and your take on that, Nikki, and why it's so important.
Yeah, this is one of those areas that I in the last couple of years, that's why I like circled back to psychology. But I feel like human factors is a lot bigger than psychology, right? It's psychology, it's engineering, it's how do we build systems that are efficient, effective? How are we making them useful, for people? And so I think a lot about security tooling. So how is the security tooling that we're building effective for the security practitioners that are using them? I also think about like, cloud systems or just systems in general. How can we make them easier for people to secure? Secure configuration is tough. And so I think understanding human factors can really positively impact how we create security tools.
I think it could also, if we thought about that a little bit more from the vendor point of view, again, 30 years of sales background, not too much cybersecurity background. But the one thing I've noticed is that vendors seem to focus on the cool and useful stuff that their products do and the bells and whistles rather than where it fits and interacts with your existing initiatives and operations, how it could shift things elsewhere. And more importantly, none of the marketing psychology seems to be around driving the individual's buying decision when they're selling products, but they're not taking into account the people they're selling them to. So CISOs are a great example of people who are hounded on a daily basis by product vendors. But the approaches, in my humble opinion, are a little bit lacking. And I think if people or firms spent a bit more time understanding what drives the decisions they make, understanding what drives them full stop, it would make it a lot easier because there's no such thing as a rational buyer out there
Mm.
in the market. Because if there was, there wouldn't be the big brands out there selling the products that are the same as everyone else's for 3 times as much, would there?
Yeah, I think it's a really challenging thing to because you want to make a great product, right? You want to make a great product, but I think what at least what I've seen when it comes to, using security tooling, especially as a practitioner, it can be it can be a lot to spend time to configure that tool properly. You have to have good
Yes.
experience, you have to have good skill set, you have to really spend time with the tool, and that can take a lot of time. Whether we have that time or not. And so I think that, creating great security tools and great products for people is just as important as helping them understand, how to configure it, how to use it, how can they actually, you know, how can they spend their time effectively with that tool. And so I think that's really where the human piece comes in is understanding, who's going to be on the other side of that keyboard that's setting it up and configuring it. And
Yeah.
and ultimately they're configuring it to provide that data back to the executives or back to, their management.
Well,
And so it's
there you're talking about communicating the business value of the tool, which again, I've seen very few vendors do from a marketing
mm,
perspective. Do you think that's an area that could be improved?
yeah, I haven't I will say I haven't had a ton of sales experience. So I would think maybe yes.
But you've
Um
got a ton of psychology experience, which is pretty much the
yeah.
same thing, I think.
So yeah, I mean, I think when it comes to I mean, this is something I've just learned, as being in security is if I can understand business requirements, it means that I think, a better security practitioner. I'm better at helping someone secure whatever they might need to secure. So yes, absolutely. If I can understand not just the business, but really their mission, I think the mission is really critical. Do you need to support a customer? Do you have a timeline? Do you have all these different things that are going to play into what can we do, with security to make sure that you are secure, we can lower risk, but
Yeah.
we're doing it in a way that makes sense.
No, absolutely. So, okay, big question for you. What do
Okay.
you see is the biggest challenge for the cybersecurity industry moving forward?
Yeah, I do think it is around human factors. I think that's going to be a really big thing, because it touches everything. It's not just vulnerability management, but how do we understand risk management as a whole? How do SOCs operate? Are we deal with so much, just like on, what we used to see in help desks, which is a lot of, churn with
Yeah,
people, because people get burnt out, they get tired, they're working 24/7. Can we implement more job rotation back in? What kind of strategies can we use to help, I think, alleviate a lot of the stress and frustration, that security practitioners might feel, whether they're on a SOC or some other team. But I think using understanding how people feel, like using that empathy and understanding what they
yeah,
might be going through, I think will help with retaining great security people.
yeah.
I know that there was this interesting article I read recently about this sort of exodus from the security industry. And I think they're talking about it because, I understand on the security side, people might be frustrated if they feel like, oh, I can't get this done, or, I'm being stopped from doing this, or I don't have access to this, I can't do this. And so I think to combat some of that, if we can start to build in things like job rotation, helping to upskill people, things like that, I think that will sort of help. But I think that's the biggest challenge I see is the people.
Are you telling me then that a good culture doesn't mean free pizza on Fridays and a free ping pong table?
I mean, free pizza is great,
It is.
but
Not with pineapple, it's not.
oh,
Oh,
I agree
are
with
we
you there.
are we disagreeing on
No,
this
no, no,
point?
I agree with you. Don't put pineapple on my pizza. Yeah, yeah.
Anchovies?
Um, oh no,
No, no.
no, just
No,
cheese is
it's
great.
a running joke between Jay Tilson, who runs a podcast. I think you've spoke to Jay. He's
Oh
given you a
yeah.
free mug. Jay hates pineapple on pizza, so it's a bit of a
Okay.
running joke on our stream. Okay, next question. As an author, what's been the most inspiring book you've ever read?
Ooh,
I
so
was I
okay.
was throwing you with the author bit at the front there,
So
trying to
do I
trip
have
you
to,
up.
yeah, right? So do I have to pick a security book, or
No,
can I
absolutely not. No, I don't
okay.
want a security book. I want an
Okay.
inspirational book, please.
All right. So I would say inspirational. So I love like sci-fi fantasy books. Like those are my
Same.
favorite.
Yep.
So Lord of the Rings, literally I read that book probably once a year, maybe
Yeah.
twice a year. I mean, I buy new books, but I always read Lord of the Rings. So I would say, as far as inspirational, the world building, the way that he told the story, I that was very inspirational to me, on sort of how do you tell a really, interesting and exciting story.
What did you read first, The Hobbit or Lord of the Rings?
I did read Lord of the Rings first, okay,
Me
don't
too.
judge me.
Yeah, I did that. Yeah.
Okay, yeah, and then I read The Hobbit later, yeah.
What about motivational type books? Have you ever read those, or do you not have any belief that they're actually worth their salt?
So I don't read a ton of them, but I would say, probably because I have a lot of, like, internal motivation. I just naturally love to get out there and do things, so
Yeah.
I haven't had a problem with motivation, mostly just because, like, I just love doing things. Um, but I would say, like, the biggest motivation for me is probably when people say, like, "No, you can't do that,"
Yeah,
or, "Ugh,
same.
I don't think you're gonna be able to do that." I'm like, "Oh, okay. All right, I'll just go
I'll
do
tell
it."
you the story quickly of what launched me into 25 years in financial services. So I'd been living in the Canary Islands for 4 years, surfing every morning, chartering mock pirate galleons and running booze cruises with a team of people on mopeds. It was a wonderful life. Met a girl, she fell pregnant. We came home. I had to get a job in a call center. I hated this job in the call center. It was at Aviva, or Norwich Union as it was then. And I remember having a one-to-one with my manager one day, who wasn't a particularly nice person. And she said, "Simon, you're a bit older than everyone else." I was 26. Everyone else was like 17. She said,
Mm,
"I think it'd be great if you became a team leader." And I said, honestly, Michelle, I can't think of anything worse. What I'd like, which is probably quite insulting because that was her job. I said, I want to be a financial advisor. And she laughed in my face and told me it would take me 10 years to do that. So I bought the books, FPC 1 and 2. 6 months later, I got a job at Sun Life Financial of Canada. And the biggest motivation points in all of my life have been when people tell me I can't do something. It's like a
Right.
red rag to a bull, isn't it?
Right, I think so. I think so. I had, yeah, I had someone tell me, when I was starting my first doctorate that they were like, "Oh, it's gonna take you 6 years to do that, it's gonna take you forever." So I did it in 2 because I was I was highly motivated to prove them wrong. So,
That's
sometimes that's all it
amazing.
takes.
No, absolutely. There's a question that was asked before that I haven't. Oh, hold on. Let's put you back up there. There we go. You might have answered it earlier, as Michael said, but what made you transition into security? He saw
Mm.
that you have extensive experience looking at your LinkedIn. What was the turning point for you? I mean, I know you mentioned your love of vulnerability management, but was there anything else?
Yeah, I would say just a natural curiosity. I think, understanding technology at a much in a different way. I understood how to configure and install and manage and operations. I understood all of that, but to really understand how to secure lots of different things in lots of different ways, that was a very interesting challenge to me. And one of the reasons why I wanted to get into security for
And
sure.
it's clear that you like a challenge, Nikki. I think
Yeah.
we've established that. Is that why you do triathlons then?
Oh yeah, so I started doing triathlons a few years ago, maybe like 5, 6 years ago. And one of the things I found about triathlons that was really challenging, and we talked a little bit about this, but I was terrible at swimming. I could run, I could bike okay, but I was pretty terrible at swimming. And I was like, all right, I want to see if I can do all three. And so that really motivated me to do that. But yeah, it's just been really fun to do that.
I'm the other way around. I'm terrible at cycling. I blame
Okay.
it on. I used to swim an awful lot as a teenager, and I damaged my knees through overtraining in my teens. So it's fine when I swim or when I walk or jog, but when I use a bike, it's like this horrible grinding sound every time the pedal.
Yeah, that's probably not good. Yeah.
No, so I just avoid cycling like the plague. Plus, middle-aged men or nearly 50-year-old men in lycra isn't a good look, in
Okay.
my opinion.
I will say though, the age groups when it comes to like triathlons and running and stuff, some of those age groups are like the toughest competition for
I know.
sure.
Well, let me share this with you. So when I started swimming again, only about 4 or 5 weeks ago now, I was being lapped by octogenarians in the pool,
Okay.
and that to me was the biggest motivation I could have to try and improve. But
Yeah. Yeah.
Dominic
I
said,
was
"Is Nikki's dog her triathlon partner? Help to use up some of the energy. There's a good
Yes, she
idea."
does she does run with me. She is much faster than I am, but she does run with me. Yes.
Couple of things quickly. I noticed that Jed's already bought your book, so thanks, Jed.
Oh, thank you.
You'll have to let me know if it's a good read. I'm going to buy a copy. It'll probably take longer to get over the pond than it will to you, so please do let me know. Last question then, before we start to wrap things up. We hear a lot about skills gaps in the industry. I've got my own opinion on where the skills gaps are, which probably aren't the same as most other people's. What's your opinion on whether there is a skill gap, and if there is, where is it?
It's interesting. Man, this is a tough question because
It's
I
always the
don't
toughest at the last, Nikki. It's
yeah, I
just the way it
appreciate
works.
that.
Yeah.
So I would say as far as skills gap, I don't know if if it's like a technical skills thing necessarily because I work with so many and I've met so many great technical people in the industry. So I guess I don't necessarily buy that there's a skills gap, but I do think that there is a gap in people who work in cybersecurity. We do need more people. So I don't know if it's a skills gap as much as we
People
do
gap.
need yeah, more of a we do need more people in cybersecurity, but I would say we just need more technical people in general.
And can I use the diversity comment, but not as in diversity of color, creed, or sexuality or gender? I meant diversity of personality type, diversity
mm,
of thinking, which is irrelevant whether you're a man or a woman or from a different country. Do you think that's something we need to encourage more of? Because the industry is full of middle-aged white men, Nikki.
yeah, well, I'll make the comment that diversity in background, skill set, all of those things are super important because problem solving doesn't happen, like I said, on a lonely island, right? The more that we can talk to each other and have a different background, like I've worked with really great security people that had a background in finance.
Yeah.
Like they had a degree in finance and they decided to come into cybersecurity and they were fantastic.
And what
So
was it that made them fantastic?
they were it was their problem solving. It was like they understood things a little bit differently because they had that, how much does this tool cost? How are we using
Yeah.
this? What does this mean? So they thought about
The
things differently
business
than I
side as
did.
well.
Exactly. Yeah. So absolutely, I would say that, diversity in thought, diversity in backgrounds and skill sets. I would say even from a psychology perspective, I know a fantastic cognitive psychologist. Her name's Dr. Margaret Cunningham, who transitioned into cybersecurity, and now she's doing some data sciencey type stuff too. She's incredible. We're so lucky to have her in cyber. So yeah, psychologists, financial backgrounds, anything that you want to come and bring to cybersecurity, we need people with all different types of backgrounds for
That
sure.
sounds like there's hope for all of you out there who are watching this, who are trying to break in from other industries. I mean, the irony that I spent 25 years in financial services, I don't think I've brought any of that across. It's more my people skills that I've brought
Mm,
across into the industry. And again, for people wanting to break in a non-technical role, there's lots of opportunities in sales and business development for people who can have conversations with the business, can understand the challenges they've got, and perhaps help businesses understand where security tooling and consultancy services fit in. Because that, again, there's I see a gap in the leadership end for the simple reason that you've got an awful lot of people. I am telling you, there's a chance, Shane. Yeah, there's an awful lot of people who have got very technical backgrounds who've now been sometimes forced into leadership positions that they don't
sure.
particularly want, and I think there's a bit of a gap there. But there's obviously you still need maybe a couple of inches deep foundational knowledge across the board, which in itself isn't a 5 minute job, is it?
Yeah, that's the challenging thing, right? Is I think we have, there's a lot of technical people that want to stay technical and don't want to do management. And I think
Yeah,
that that's okay, right?
and that's fine.
That's all
Yeah,
right. Yeah, but we need both. We need people that understand people in leadership. We need people who understand tech in leadership. I've been very fortunate to work with some great management and executive management who are still technical, but also great, problem solvers and have great soft skills too. So I think they're out there. I do think the industry has, I mean, even in just the last year, I think the industry has changed so much. We're talking about
massively.
soft skills now. You know,
Yeah.
we weren't really talking about those before. It was like, yeah, but can you do a pen test? It was like, okay, well, maybe, but also I can do these other things too. So
Yeah, I think.
I
I
think
mean,
it's
for me, the soft skills are hugely important. Dominic's asked a really relevant question. I wonder if he's asking this because I'm nearly 50, but I'll pose it to you. Is there a maximum age group for cybersecurity?
gosh, I hope
Be
not.
careful how you answer that one.
Yeah, no, I really hope I don't think so. I've worked with people from all age groups, everyone from, people in college up to, I don't know. I've worked with lots of great people that are in all age groups. So I would say no.
I mean, you mentioned it earlier, cognitive bias or subconscious bias, whatever way you want to look at it, it is a real thing. I've seen people who my age and slightly older, who've really struggled in the job
Mm,
market to get work, and I think there's only so much you can do about people's unconscious bias. It's the same as
yeah.
the unconscious bias of the older leaders, on the older CEOs and CFOs out there who fail to see the difference between tangible and intangible assets. They've been brought up with the business that it's all about protecting the stuff that they can see. And now we've got data being probably the most valuable asset in the world, but they're failing to grasp that. And again, I think we need those people with the soft skills and the business skills to be able to come in and be the interpreter, perhaps, for those people.
Yeah, I agree. I think as far as just needing more people with soft skills or not considering them sort of like an underrated thing, being able to
Yeah.
say, "Hey, I'm great at relationship building. I'm great at understanding how people feel." That's a great asset in cybersecurity.
No, absolutely. Okay, let me think of an insightful last question. I know what I want to touch on. So there's been a couple of comments in here. Paul Cummings from Whole Cyber Human Initiative is in the house. Hey, Paul, good to see you. He's put, I think it's a people interviewing people issue, which
Mm,
leads me into the question around expectations and managing them on both sides. So there seems to be an awful lot of poorly worded and poorly written job adverts out there. You've then got the plethora of boot camps telling people, like myself 2 years ago, that do our course and in 6 months' time you can be a cybersecurity expert. When in reality, and this isn't a gatekeeping comment, you need a bit more foundational knowledge than 6 months, I think, to come in at an entry level role. Do you think there's a problem in the industry with job descriptions? And if there is, how can we solve that?
So I do. So yes, I do, and I touch a little bit on that in the book too, because to me, job roles and job descriptions are really important. I think to understand how is a person going to, work in a team? What are they sort of responsible for? What are they going to be doing? And there are some good job roles out there that talk about soft skills, about, hey, you're going to need to work with these other teams. You're not going to work in a silo. You got to be able to work together. Having that kind of language in there, I think, is really important. But I also see it from the other perspective too, where there's been a lot of research on women applying for certain roles. And there was this research that was done that said that, any job description that has
I
10
saw
bullets
that.
or more of technical skills that you must have, a lot of women aren't going to apply to that because they're
I
going to say,
don't I
I'm
don't know
not.
if it was the same research, but the paper I read, it was that again, it's very gender specific, but I'm sure it's
Hmm,
personality specific as well.
could
But
be.
women would want to see that they have at least 50% or no 75% of the
Yes.
skills, whereas men would do it with 40% will be enough. Oh, I can do that. That
You're
kind of
right. Yeah, so I think that's sort of a good use case, right? Like that's not all cases and everything, but it's a good use case for, maybe where we need to think about how we write job descriptions. I think terminology is really important.
yeah.
There was a really great job role that I read recently that it had maybe 5 bullets that it was expecting for maybe a security engineer position, but at the bottom it said, if you don't have all these skills, apply anyway. We want to see your resume because maybe your resume has these skills, but you don't feel like you touched on them enough or something. And so I think job roles are starting to change and starting to say, hey, if you're not sure, apply anyway. We still want to see your resume, and maybe we'll reach out to you, maybe for a different role, maybe for this role, but apply anyway. So I think that's a big boost to
I think firms
changing
are
culture.
realizing that they're missing out on talent by the way that they worded them, perhaps. But I mean, at the moment, it's definitely an employer's market. How it is at the moment. Again, that then leads us on to the importance of having a personal brand, or making sure that you're demonstrating out in public. You know what you're talking about. You can relate it, and you're desirable to an employer. I mentioned 10-15 minutes in that the best question would win a book. I'm going to buy a copy of Dr. Robinson's book, send it to her to get signed. And I think the best question's got to be yours, Carlos, which is pull out the crystal ball. Where do you see vulnerability management in the years to come? So well done, Carlos. We'll get one in the post to you soon. I'll liaise with Nikki on that. Any final thoughts from you, Nikki, or any recommendations for our audience before I wrap things up with my sales pitch for the events at the end?
Sure. Yeah. I think just a final note. If you haven't done any research in human factors and you're in cybersecurity or you're thinking about getting in cybersecurity, I highly recommend checking out it's like the Human Factors and Ergonomics Society. They have a cybersecurity SIG. Check out some research, like just sort of, get out there and see what's out there. It doesn't have to be human factors like specific, but there's a lot more to cybersecurity than, cybersecurity. There's a lot more there.
I think I found the website that you're talking about. So let me drop that in the chat. I've also dropped in a couple up there, or wrong side, up here. There's a link to Nikki's book, if anyone would like to buy it. And there's a link to the website. My final comment will be, we have got, if I can find the chat, here it is, trying to do two things at once. Simon can't multitask. Realized that a long time ago. So for those that don't know, InfoSec Live is kicking off, back to the human factors, kicking off an in real life tour in Cambridge in 2 weeks' time in the UK, where we've got between 40 and 50 security leaders coming together for beer, pizza, and a bit of playing with Lego, and talking a little bit about incident response. Trying to make these events a bit different, where we're led on the topics by what the leadership want to hear about rather than being vendor led. Very, very excited to announce that I'm flying over the pond for March the 30th, Tampa Bay, Florida, having another CISO Experience event over there, when I think I'm then going to attend the Tampa Bay B-Sides on the 1st of April, which is very exciting. Another event planned for RSA in April, back to the UK for Manchester, then back over the pond again to New York in the summer. So I'm very, very excited about that. If anyone's interested in attending, being involved, or sponsoring those events, please do reach out to me. I mean, for me, Nikki, face-to-face networking has been something that I've done my whole life. It's been sorely missed by me the last few years, especially with the pandemic in the middle. And I think going back to my original sales training when I was on the telephone, them telling us that you lose 70% of your communication method when you're on the phone just goes to show how important it is to have that face-to-face interaction. So sales pitch done from me. Dr. Robinson, thank you so much for taking the time to come on the show today. I wish you every success with your book. I know there's also some other exciting news that you can't talk about at the moment, so make sure you follow Dr. Robinson on LinkedIn. Do you mind if I just put your LinkedIn profile on here before we wrap things up? Is that okay?
Oh, yeah, please. Thank you.
Let me share that with everyone. You're not going to be swearing about me later when you get 200 connection requests.
No.
Hold on one sec. Let me just copy that. Sorry, I can't do more than one thing at a time. This is one of the things I learned from being diagnosed with ADHD, the importance of monotasking, in that you can't have too many tabs
I think you're
open.
doing great. You're managing a ton. I think it's awesome.
I don't know. You can't hear it in here. I think I'm getting there. But look, everyone in the chat, thank you so much for making it so engaging. Dr. Robinson, thank you so much for taking the time to come on. Hope to catch up with you again soon. And see you all later. Have a great night.
Thank you.
Take care. Bye.